All right, let's go ahead and get started. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our third virtual T-Town Hall. This event this evening will be hosted by Councilmember Robert Thoms and Councilmember Conor McCarthy, and I'm delighted that they will be here this evening with us. The event is being recorded and will be made available for those who are unable to attend. As I said just a few minutes ago, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Again, down at the bottom of your screen is the question and answer button, and feel free to ask your question in that box. This virtual T-Town Hall event is also being transmitted into Spanish in real time. Listen to the discussion in Spanish. You will need to be using the most recent version of the Zoom app, and please look for the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom window and select Spanish to hear the interpreter. I also want to thank Daniela for joining us again this evening as she did last week. Please note that the information you are using to access this virtual T-Town Hall via Zoom is subject to future public disclosure requests. And with that, let's get started. Many of you have reached out to us to share your questions and concerns during COVID-19. And it became clear to us that there was a pressing need to come together and to address some of the key issues that have become very prominent throughout the pandemic. The virtual T-Town Hall series is an opportunity for us to do just that. Over the course of this series, we will be taking a deeper dive into some of the matters that are most important to you. Tonight, our focus will be on issues related to economic development. And as we think about the engine that drives this city, it really is economic development. We know that businesses are the source of opportunity for income for nearly all of Tacoma residents. In addition to this, businesses like laundromats, banks, and others provide necessary services that we all need every single day. And they are the source of our community character. Imagine your closest business district without your favorite restaurant or shop. And for so many reasons, the many businesses of Tacoma are a vital part of our community, and I'm excited to have the opportunity tonight to focus on the impacts during COVID-19. I know that it's hard on businesses right now, but I want you to know that we're in this fight with you, and we will beat COVID together. And now I'd like to turn things over to our host, Councilmember Robert Thoms and Councilmember Conor McCarthy, Chair and Vice Chair of the city's Economic Development Committee, who are working hard to develop tools to support local businesses during this trying time. Councilmember McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to everyone who's attended. I see it looks like there's about 22 or so attendees right now. Some of the names I know, some I don't. But for everybody who's here, thank you for attending. And I'm sure you probably have better things to do, like meeting with your family. But we know that these issues are extremely important. So I really appreciate you being here tonight. I want to just say it is this being my first web town hall. It is a little challenging to not be able to see your audience, to see what your audience, to really be able to feel what the audience cares about in terms of what we address. Just briefly, I would say that we've got a great panel tonight of subject matter experts who are able to speak specifically to not only what the city of Tacoma's done with the resources we have, but what Pierce County's done, what the resources it has, what our partners at the Economic Development Board and the Chamber of Commerce are doing, what the federal government's doing. We'll have Congressman Kilmer later on, what the state of Washington's doing, Chris Green from the Department of Commerce. So we're fortunate to have people who can really drill down and give you detailed answers. Tonight we're going to talk about what we're doing collectively as a community through the different agencies, whether they're government, nonprofit, or business. But it's also really important that we hear from you and hear your questions and concerns. I think the date of the closure originally was March 23rd, when that I think it was about that time, 7 weeks ago or so, when Governor Inslee effectively, under authority granted him by state law, shut down pretty much all of business in the state except for what was considered essential businesses. And over the course of the past 7 weeks, there's been some movement in allowing more businesses to open. And it's really, you know, as we look towards the future, understanding that, look, we all care about the health of our family members, the health of our neighbors and community members, the health of our customers and the people we serve in the context of the businesses that are being run in this community. While we all care about that, that care also has to take into consideration the ability for folks to be able to earn a wage. Because as we've seen over the past 7 weeks, for people, and I know a few who haven't been able to earn a wage, and where the unemployment security hasn't necessarily come through, and where the federal dollars or city or state dollars have already run out, are really in a pinch. And they want to do what's right for, as I said, their family, their neighbors, their customers, but they're extremely hurting and under extreme financial duress. And so most of these regulations are coming top down from the state. And one of the things I want to leave you with after we hear from you is, you know, we all, whether we agree on everything or not in terms of what's happening at the state level, I know that we all, as elected officials, want to and are advocating with those folks who are making these decisions to try and expedite getting us back to work in the safest, most prudent way possible. And I think the biggest challenge for everyone, including the experts, and I don't pretend to be one, the biggest challenge is there are just so many unknowns right now in terms of how to do this right. So I really look forward with that. I'll just kind of end my remarks and say I really look forward to hearing from our panelists and hearing questions from the community. And we are in uncharted waters. It's been said again and again, it's not cliche, we're still there, but we have a job to do as elected officials and as public servants, and that is to do the best we can for the people we serve. And that's you all. And that's in terms of public health, and it's also in terms of economic sustainability. And one of the things that has perhaps bothered me the most when we talk about economic development is that the word just has no real meaning. What I'm talking about when I talk about economic development is the wages that families need to be able to earn and the revenues that small business owners need to be able to collect in order to provide for their families. And that's been impacted, there's no question. So moving forward, I'm looking forward to helping those families, those business owners in our community get going and get as back to normal as quick as possible. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Thoms.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Vice Chair McCarthy, for your comments. I share a lot of the same sentiments that you do as I think about how we, as policymakers, at least the local level, can best support our industry and business sector as they try to help us provide the right type of tools to reinvigorate our economy. Obviously, right now, most people's efforts have been focused on, you know, public health and safety of our citizens during the COVID pandemic, and that is absolutely appropriate. I know us, the members of this Tacoma City Council, the Pierce County Council, our state legislators, and our federal delegation have been working really hard to make sure that we, you know, protect all of our human services safety net needs that we have out there, and that's to be lauded. But as we look towards what, you know, the post stay-at-home order looks like, is this phased approach as we have in Washington State, and more broadly what we look like across America, I think it's important for us to hear from our businesses and our industry about what we can do as policymakers to best support and be a partner in the restoration of our economy to ease us out. And, you know, and I too think about wages, but I like to tell people I don't think the economy isn't an esoteric thing. To me, the economy is about confidence, and about the confidence of spending resources to create wages, to create jobs, to create products, to create community. And so what I would hope that we would focus on in our committee here in the city of Tacoma with our colleagues at the county and our state and federal delegation is, what can we be doing to both provide sort of these stimulus resources that you see out there now, but also go look at some of the regulatory reform things that we can be doing as well to sort of enhance the confidence of those who've already invested in our community, specifically here in Tacoma and in our region, and really be in lockstep with them about what are the type of things that need to happen in order for them to feel confident again. And so I really appreciate the hard work of the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Bureau, the Pierce County Economic Development staff, Jeff Robinson, who runs our Economic Development Department here, and the leadership of the mayor working through her numerous boards and organizations that she's a member of. And what I hope we will hear from folks tonight and in the coming weeks from an economic development perspective is, tell us what you need to turn the dials up, to set the conditions of which are going to make you confident again, because we want folks to invest in our community. I want people to know that Tacoma is open for business, that our region is eager to thrive again. And I'm very confident that many of the very significant pillars of what was making our economy build as it has over the last 15 years and really pretty significantly since 2008, the last downturn, the 2008 to 10 timeframe, was we were putting in policies that were spurring investment. And so I look to continue that line of policy, at least in my capacity as Economic Development Chair. And I'll just say to those who are participating, thank you for taking the time. Obviously, you could be doing other things with your evening, but I appreciate hearing from you. And thank you for bearing with the technology that we have to use now to be able to come to you. But we're always here working hard, hoping to do everything we can in our power to make Tacoma the best and most important place for you to spend your time and resources. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, I think you were on
Sorry,
mute.
I said all those wonderful words. I said something really important and nobody heard me. But it looked like Derek must have read my lips when I said his name, because he sat forward when I said that. Is that your roommate behind you? Anyway, I just want to remind everybody that you can ask your questions now, or once you hear the presentation, you can ask your questions to the presenters. There are 4 questions I can see already in the Q&A box, and we haven't even started yet. Again, if this is your first time on Zoom, your Q&A box is it's the bottom button in your Zoom window in the center, and staff will be passing on your questions to the presenters this evening. I also want to remind you, if you're joining us, that you also have an option of asking your questions in Spanish. So we will follow up after tonight's T-Town Hall to answer any questions that we weren't able to get to this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember McCarthy, who's going to get started with our panelists. Thank you all again for being here this evening. And Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Congressman Kilmer, for being here tonight. We've already expressed our gratitude to the subject matter experts on the call, and they'll be here to answer a few questions in just a second, and then we'll tee up Congressman Kilmer for his remarks. But prior to doing that, we're going to hear from the City of Tacoma's Director of Community Economic Development, Jeff Robinson, who's going to give us kind of a high-level overview of what we're doing to support economic development and how we're partnering with our local partners, the state and the federal government. So Jeff, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy. I am Jeff Robinson, Director of Community and Economic Development for the city, and good evening to everyone. I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving a high-level overview of the work of the city and that of our partners in response to the multifaceted crisis caused by COVID-19. This has truly been a partnership and a coordinated effort by all of the local and regional economic development organizations. Most of us speak almost on a daily basis, and every Friday afternoon we close our weeks out with a group meeting when we discuss the happenings of the week and what we have to do moving forward. So some of the city's key economic development work in response to COVID-19 is focused on financial assistance, disseminating pertinent information, providing technical assistance, and some code-related actions to assist the business community. We created the MakeItTacoma.com website portal as a part of this effort, and have done Gov delivery bulletins to all Tacoma licensed businesses to give them information on financial support, employee resources, health, public services, and guidance in reopening their businesses. And as we've done this work on COVID-19, we've also continued to do our regular work by conducting virtual business retention and expansion visits and following up on those as needed, as well as responding to numerous leads from interested businesses that we continue to see and experience an interest in moving their enterprises into our community. We've also created this COVID-19 Stabilization Loan Program. It was a $1 million fund that was available to businesses in the city with 10 or fewer employees that had been in business for a minimum of a year and offered a $15,000 maximum loan. We have approved 69 businesses for funding, totaling around $994,000, with an average loan size of about $14,400. Those businesses have been in business an average of 14 and a half years and have an average of 6 employees. Our Minority Business Development Agency also continues to work on COVID-related activities and supporting people and businesses that are applying to the SBA for financing. So both pre-application and then all the post-application work that needs to be done as well, which is sometimes more cumbersome and difficult to respond to than actually putting in the application. Prior to COVID-19, we had introduced a monthly group training that we did in concert with our small business development group and the MBDA, and we'll be starting those up again soon in a virtual platform as well. Several other things that we've done to assist our current businesses is we've deferred principal and interest to our current borrowers for our revolving loan fund, and we've removed any penalties for the non-payment of B&O taxes for those businesses that were taking advantage of our B&O tax credits. We've also revised a few of our regulations and revised the use and approval process for the use of temporary signs and parking areas for pickup for restaurants as well. Tacoma Public Utilities has suspended disconnects for business customers. They've waived late fees for their business customers, and they too continue to work with companies one-on-one to assure they have access to information and programs that can help them weather this storm. The Pierce County Economic Development Department created the Emergency Small Business Relief Loan Program that I think Betty will be speaking about in just a bit for unincorporated Pierce County to begin with. But as they received additional funding from the federal government, they expanded that program to allow for businesses that are in the incorporated areas, including the city of Tacoma, to apply for those loans as well. And they too have a COVID webpage that they've established and they update on a daily basis. The Economic Development Board of Tacoma Pierce County has co-hosted with the Chamber business webinars on 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, and have been averaging between 250 and 800 participants per call that have had subject matter experts as well as elected officials from the federal, state, and local governments. They've been providing information and handling hundreds of referrals for one-on-one support for businesses that are seeking information and assistance with applying for loan programs and other types of assistance. They've also worked with Washington State on their Small Business Emergency Grant Program, and I think that Bruce and Chris can probably talk about that in a little bit more detail and get more to the point than I'm able to with my level of expertise on that. The Tacoma-Pierce County Chamber of Commerce has been co-hosting, as I said, a series of broadcasts on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, and they've established a very important website. It's called the Rapid Response South Sound website that gives up-to-date financial, regulatory, employment, and communication information with an extensive FAQ section. And they can offer direct connection to experts to help answer individual questions and concerns. Those can be answered either by email or phone, depending on the inquirer's preference. And they've established the Rapid Response South Sound Coalition that's helping us, the Pierce County, Tacoma-Pierce County region, speak with one voice on the need to help our local communities and businesses and attempt to correct the deficiencies that we see in existing federal and state COVID-19 response packages. The Downtown Tacoma Partnership has been working hard. They continue to do their 7 days a week safe and clean protocols to respond to the changing needs. They've created the Heroes Meals program that secured 2,000 meals from downtown restaurants to deliver to frontline employees. They have a rapid mural program that has up to now done 12 murals installed by local artists, and they too continue to do their regular work in business recruitment. Workforce Central has been very busy partnering with the Washington Workforce Association members and Employment Security to receive funding from the Federal Department of Labor for COVID-related grants, and including one just this week for $1.3 million in emergency response. They're also providing virtual services via technology for live presentations to respond to layoffs, furloughs, and separations of employment, and are doing virtual hiring events, job fairs, and workshops. And as we all know, tourism is a big part of our economy down here in Pierce County and Tacoma. And Tourism Tacoma continues to work and coordinate efforts with our local hoteliers and other lodging establishments, and have been able to help with the conversion of several hotels to supply COVID assistance to medical, military, and supply chain folks that need a place to stay during this crisis. They also are working with regional peers to prepare for the opening of drive time markets, because what we've heard so far is that the best market research is telling us that as we return to leisure travel, most of it will be executed in a car within 100 miles of the destination. So as you can tell, all of our organizations have been working very hard. We're coordinating our efforts to make sure we're not stepping over or onto one another, that we're adding value to the work that we're doing individually and as a group. And as this is a moving target, as both the mayor, Councilmember McCarthy, as well as Councilmember Thoms have indicated, we need to be nimble to continue to create new responses to the needs as they arise, and with the resources that we have available to ourselves. So with that, I think I'll stop, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. So just a couple questions here. I mean, the first, can you just lay out real quick how much funding the city of Tacoma has received to date? I know there was a lot of information there. You gave us some info, but just big picture, so we know exactly how many dollars the city of Tacoma's gotten through these various programs.
We don't know how many loans have been made or what sizes through the SBA. We have not received any direct funding for COVID-related activities directly to the city. Most of those have been channeled to the state and to the county. We have received additional community development block grant funding of which about $600,000 will be dedicated to small business support. The Minority Business Development Agency has also applied to the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we expect to receive a substantial amount of money from them. And we are in the process of applying to the U.S. Economic Development Administration, part of the Department of Commerce, to recapitalize our revolving loan fund to the tune of about $1.2 million. And we expect to hear about both of those awards in the next couple of weeks.
So in terms of money's coming directly to the city of Tacoma. We're talking about being a pass-through for our small business loans, and we're talking about federal CDBG dollars. That's to date. We know there's more money coming from other partners.
To date, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. And so that leads into the next one question that I think Councilmember Thoms is going to have for our County Economic Development Director.
Yeah, this is for Betty with the Pierce County Economic Development Department, the director. Just to follow up on that question, one of the questions that was provided to us was how much funding has the county received for these similar purposes, and how are you coordinating your work with Jeff and his team to ensure we're opening it up for businesses across our region?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Thoms and Mayor Woodards and Councilmember McCarthy. We appreciate you including us on the town hall this evening. As Jeff mentioned, we all in the economic ecosystem work really, really well together in Pierce County. And I think because we have those great relationships, we've also been able to work well together during our COVID crisis. And even around the table, when you look at the expertise of Jeff, Bruce, and Tom and I, we have been through 9/11 with businesses. We've been through the Boeing bust with businesses. We've been through .com bomb and the Great Recession. So I think having some of those things in our belt, we realized right from the beginning that communication is really important, and having boots on the ground and hearing what's important to businesses helps make our plan work together. In regards to the COVID resources, as Jeff mentioned, originally, and actually I want to give credit to Jeff because he gave us the Attorney General's ruling that was able to have us work as a county to do our first loan program, which is using the general fund resources that they established for $640,000. After that, we were awarded COVID grant money from the federal government, and that goes into 4 different buckets, of which one of them is public health emergency response, one is economic stabilization and recovery, one is community response and resilience, one is essential government services, and the other is a contingency reserve. From that program, there are big bucket benchmarks of dollars going to the different pieces, but the council has allocated just a portion of those, so 60% of the allotment for the first 60 days to see what else is needed and where do we need to pivot, knowing that it seems like, just like for you, every day is a marathon and something changes, something's different, and we need to adjust that way. So from the CARES money for economic development, the council has, there's $3.6 million allocated to small business loans, and those have been opened up to all of Pierce County businesses. And the thing that probably is really unique in it is the council both being very entrepreneurial, but we also wanted to make sure there's a low barrier entry to be able to get these loans. So many of them, so we've had over 572 applicants. Many of those did not have their financial documentations, and we've actually helped work with them to put balance sheets together, to help put the information necessary so they can be able to qualify for loans. From that time, currently we have authorized, let me make sure I get my numbers here for you, 241 businesses for $1.526 million. We did have 28 of those companies for about $151,000 say, no, thank you. They're getting it mixed up a little bit with the Congress PPP program and worried about, how they have to pay their payroll and those kinds of things. So we're working through some of those logistics. We also have, of that 241, 85 are awaiting signings. So when I say that, we actually meet with every single business one-on-one as they come in to sign. We hear about their stories, and I tell you, it's so heartwarming. I get in the elevator every day and cry. Some of them are really, really working to bootstrap themselves together, but most importantly, they're caring about their employees and how do they make sure they can stay connected there. And they're trying to figure out how to pivot. Some that are really small have already tried to figure out what's it going to be COVID compliant, and taking that downtime to kind of set things up, whether it's a pedicure station that has the dividers between the different chairs. So they're trying to be 5 steps ahead on that. We still do have in our loan process of 292 applicants for another $1.5 million. So we're processing those currently. Many of them we have to get information back with them. Of all of the applicants, 192 actually came from the city of Tacoma. We did work with the city of Tacoma that we did not do Tacoma's loans until you guys finished your process. So that way we don't want to duplicate. We want to make sure we're able to distribute those as far as we can. So we do have the list of who you've awarded. So we're trying to go through that process as we're going through the different loans. And when we're all done, we will make sure each of the communities know, who's been received funding in their community. So that's a big picture there. The other items on the CARES Act under the economic stabilization, in addition to the business loans, we also are working on COVID CARES kits, and these will be PPE that many of the businesses can't get. And some of the companies they may be a light manufacturer for 15 years and they can't get their supplies because they're all going to other purposes, medical, first responders. So we're working to get COVID kits that we could give to every business in Pierce County. So things like thermometers, disposable masks, some of those things just to help them, because we know most of our small businesses, 90% of Pierce County businesses are small businesses under 100 employees. Most of them don't have a lot of resources or savings to be able to been closed for a couple months, to then all of a sudden come back to a new world that they have to only bring part of their employees back at a time, that they also have to space out things, which means less revenue to make things pencil. They also have to buy inventories that they may not have, whether it's restaurants with food and supplies, and that supply chain is being disrupted right now. If you look at beef and pork, different issues going on there. So we're just trying through this program, working with all of our partners to try to make sure our resources are spent wisely, quick and nimbly to make the best return for our small businesses, because we know they're the backbone of our community and that they employ a lot of our residents, and we want everyone back working and working back to whatever the next normal is.
Thank you, Betty. So we have 4 speakers left before we get to questions, but I did want to follow up with one just real quick. $158 million and 3.6 allocated right now to businesses in Pierce County. Is that the right?
Okay, so from that 157 million, each area, the different buckets, so public health received the most funding.
Correct. Yeah.
Economic stabilization has a bucket of 30 million, but only 60% of that has been authorized for expenditure in the next 60 days based on plans that we approved both through a steering committee in the community and also through our council. And those go for out the whole Pierce County community. So It doesn't matter if it's an egg worker, a restaurant worker, and we actually have a lot of the programs tailored to the communities that are hit the hardest on the unemployment numbers in Pierce County, and also have very high occupational impacts on COVID when they reopen.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, why not be a little bit more aggressive during the first 60 days?
We're under the constraints that council approved on the funding.
Right.
So they will evaluate it. And I will say Our council has been very entrepreneurial. Our exec has been very entrepreneurial, and we're all very bullish on Pierce County. We also are trying to use this as, how do we make sure we're one step ahead so we can be more competitive in the global marketplace, being ready to go. So they're very good on those, and we're using our resources wisely, and we're also getting a lot of leverage opportunity in the equation, which is really nice.
Right, thank you. So we've got, as I said, four speakers left here before we get to questions, and I think I'm going to just go out of turn, because when you have a member of Congress on your call, you should let them speak right away. We've already violated that rule. So I want to ask Congressman Kilmer, thank you so much for being here. I know you're on the working 24 hours a day at least. If there was another hour you'd be working at, maybe you can tell us what you've been doing and what's happened at the federal government, how you see that playing out in Tacoma and Pierce County.
You bet. Thanks for having me, and for everybody who is participating in this. Thank you. We've got some amazing leaders in the city of Tacoma, and I'm very grateful for that. And I also appreciate the city putting on these virtual town halls to just ensure folks get access to good information, accurate information. Obviously, across our region, across our entire country, this pandemic is putting an extraordinary strain on our healthcare system, on our economy, and on families. And I think most important for those watching, I just want to say I hope you're keeping safe and staying well and managing through these difficult times. I know it has been a tumultuous period in our economy. I know that our small businesses and our workers are facing unprecedented challenges. And so I hope you're hanging in there. I have been pushing hard as someone who worked in economic development professionally before I got to Congress to make sure that the response from the federal government acknowledges the important role that small businesses play. I think oftentimes, perhaps most frequently, small businesses are described as the backbone of our economy. I think that's true. I like to think about small businesses as our star running back. If you look at how we generally rack up the tough yards and score touchdowns coming out of a recession, it's actually not the big guys that are growing the jobs. It's small businesses on main streets all over this country. And unfortunately, in the face of this pandemic and the medically induced coma that our economy has been put in, our star running backs are getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage. And one of my priorities as the representative for Washington's 6th Congressional District, which includes about 70% of the population of Tacoma and everything to the west, I want to make sure we call some plays and do some blocking for our star running backs. So as has been mentioned, probably the biggest piece of that are some programs that run through the Small Business Administration, the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan programs. The economic injury disaster loans are a program that's been around for a long time and historically have been used after a natural disaster, a hurricane or a tornado or something of that nature. And actually several months ago now, in the very first coronavirus bill, I actually expanded the eligibility for that program because we were already seeing impacts even before we had a whole bunch of cases diagnosed in the state of Washington. Because we are so export dependent, we were hearing from small businesses who said, gosh, I ship to China and the ports are shut down. And so we, at that point, made small businesses eligible for these economic injury disaster loans if their injury was related to the pandemic. And then the Paycheck Protection Program is a new program, and it's a program that provides loans that can be forgiven if an employer holds on to their employees. I think it's safe to say that the rollout of that program was pretty bumpy. And in fact, I joined with several of my colleagues in communicating to the SBA that they just had to do better, that they had to make sure that lenders and the small businesses that depend on those finances are doing better and making it clearer about how to get the help that's needed. Because we're talking to businesses every day who are making decisions about whether or not to keep working and to try to weather the storm or to just fold the tent. So there was a bumpy rollout, and then on top of that, 13 days after the bill was signed into law, the program's funding ran out. About 3 weeks ago now, Congress passed a bill to refill the coffers, adding $310 billion into that Paycheck Protection Program. It also included a set aside of funds for community-based lenders, for small banks and credit unions, and an additional pot of money for medium-sized banks and for credit unions. And the idea there was to ensure that assistance for many small businesses that were left out in the first rounds, including minority-owned businesses, those operating in underserved areas and rural and in urban areas, were getting access to those resources. Frankly, more is required. I have sponsored a bill to really put that program on steroids, and a separate bill that is focused on providing grant-based aid to our Main Street employers. Tomorrow, we will be likely voting in the House on a bill called the HEROES Act. I won't go into too much detail on it because it does make some, I think, very positive changes to the Paycheck Protection Program. But because those changes haven't become law yet, they're not changes you can take to the bank quite yet. I will say that the program tries to set aside some additional, the bill we're voting on tomorrow sets aside some additional funds specifically for very small businesses for 10 or fewer employees, which too often were left out in the first round. It expands the eligibility for those programs for other types of nonprofits that were excluded in the first round. Importantly, and this is something that I've gotten asked about quite a bit, one of the most frequent questions I get is, it's great that the Paycheck Protection Program provides 8 weeks of assistance, but what happens at the end of the 8 weeks? The bill I have introduced, and in fact, the bill that we're voting on tomorrow, would provide the ability for small businesses to get an extension of that assistance, to get a longer term of funding. And it actually extends the period to, allows borrowers to choose a 24-week period for getting assistance and still to be eligible for forgiveness. One of the concerns that I've heard from employers is the requirement that 75% of the loan be used for payroll. That's a problem because that's, in many cases, that wasn't the case for small businesses prior to this pandemic. And so that requirement is removed in the bill we're voting on tomorrow. There are other components of it trying to provide additional grace and flexibility to small businesses, many of whom have been concerned about taking on one of these loans and then having it, finding out down the road that it's a mistake. So there was additional flexibility written into the bill. The final thing I just want to say, and I want to make sure we have a chance to get to questions. There's another important piece in the bill we're voting on tomorrow. And it is in the CARES Act, but it's in a way that is pretty slim. The CARES Act provides for a refundable tax credit of 50% of qualified wages, capped at $5,000 per employee, 50% of up to $10,000 of qualified wages for all calendar quarters. In the bill we're voting on tomorrow, the HEROES Act, it would increase that credit from 50% to 80% of qualified wages. And it would increase the cap from $5,000 for all calendar quarters to $12,000 for each calendar quarter for up to 3 calendar quarters. And so what that means is the HEROES Act would increase the maximum amount of credit per employee held onto from $5,000 under the CARES Act to $36,000. And it allows that credit to be used with the Paycheck Protection Program. As I've talked to a lot of small businesses, the question they persistently ask is, I want to hold on to my employees. Give me more tools to do that. The bill we're voting on tomorrow will do that by really amping up this employer retention tax credit. So I share that with you with the knowledge that it has not yet become law, but to be responsive to the question of what's going on in our nation's capital, we'll be voting on that tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Councilmember McCarthy and Councilmember Thoms. We've got a lot of questions, so we're gonna move into the question and answer period. And I just want to remind everybody that in addition to Congressman Kilmer, who's spoken, and Betty Capistani from Pierce County, we also have Bruce Kendall, who is the head of our Economic Development Board. We also have Chris Green, who's here from the State Department of Commerce. And so just want to remind everybody that and we also have Tom Pearson, who's head of the chamber, on our call as well. So we've got lots of people to ask questions to. So I'm going to turn it back over to Councilmember McCarthy and Councilmember Thoms to begin to ask the questions of our panelists.
Okay, Robert, I don't see you moving ahead, so I'm gonna hop on up here. I like, this is a question from an anonymous attendee. It's a great question. Is there a projection of how many businesses will be lost due to COVID-19? And I would just add in Tacoma and Pierce County. And I would add to that question, if we don't know how many businesses, I know there's been some studies on the percentage of small businesses that may close, but do we also know the number of dollars we anticipate our local community losing? And I think that's important because, well, for a number of reasons, but one is we heard earlier from Jeff that the city of Tacoma has only, really at this moment, a couple $1 million to pass through, and that the county has about $4 million to pass through to small business. I mean, that doesn't take into account what Congressman Kilmer just spoke to, which is the PPP program and some of the other funding and tax credits. But in my view, we have to compare the scale of the harm with the scale of the good we're trying to do here. So if we're only able to generate, $5 to $10 million in this county in a short period of time, but meanwhile, the harm to the county is in the hundreds of millions, we just have to take that into account. So I'm sorry, I talked over the question. Great question. And I want somebody to take that on. I don't know if Jeff, maybe you want to speak to it first about how many businesses we anticipate losing in our community.
More than we would want to. I don't think we can put a number on it right now, Council Member. I think that over the course of the next several weeks, as the governor allows businesses to start to reopen slowly under certain circumstances, we'll have a better handle on that. One of the things that we're going to be doing is following up with all the applicants and recipients of our loan funds to find out from them how they're doing, what their plans are, so that we have firsthand information from them and also know what other types of support services they may need to assist them moving forward. So it's hard to put a number on it at this point. Someone else might be able to answer that question. I see Tom has got.
So the only thing I would say to that is there's just, again, Tom Pearson, Tacoma Pierce County Chamber, there's a lot of there's so many unknowns still, right? We don't know exactly when phase 2 is going to be implemented. We hope it's June 1st, but we still, if you heard the governor today at 3:30, we're not sure of that. So until we start to get back open, will we really understand how bad or are these businesses going to be able to open? We know restaurants, retail, they're the ones that had to shut down first, and they're the ones that are probably most hurt by this, and they'll probably be impacted the longest because they're the last ones to get fully engaged and back into the community in terms of being operated in business. But what I can tell you, and some of these folks have said it on this call, Betty, Congressman, others, we're all working very hard to make sure that businesses can make it, whether it's helping them with the PPP funds, whether it's Pierce County funds, or the city's been doing a huge amount of work in terms of the funds, and as well as being flexible with the rules that they have in place. And lastly, to build on Kilmer's comment, I think we just got to be in beast mode, right? So our businesses are those running backs, and our running back is a star, and we just have to support them. We have to support them as a community as much as we can. And we got to make sure that we can do our part as citizens to make sure that we can help those businesses locally as much as we can.
Good answer, Tom. There's two one that I think will build on what you just said, Tom. It's from Maria Lee. It says, from each of our perspectives, what can community members be doing to support our local businesses? And if you don't mind, I think I'll start off by saying, obviously, go out to the restaurants that are open, to the businesses that are open. I know for my family, I spend an inordinate amount of time at either Ace Hardware or Home Depot or local hardware stores, getting all kind of stuff that I can do around our house. So I think, just be consumers, be people that are, want to avail themselves of the things that are open, that make their lives better. So and that's one perspective that I have. If there's others on our panel that would want to answer what, from their perspective, we could be doing to support local businesses, be happy to have you.
Maybe Councilmember Tom, this is Chris Green with the Department of Commerce. I think what you said was absolutely perfect, and I agree. I think that what's going to be interesting is as we get more and more businesses to reopen, and we very carefully and safely walk through this reopen process at the state, we have concerns that folks might not, with the same frequency, patronize some of these businesses because there are concerns. People are concerned for their own health and safety. So I'll just add one more thing to what you said about what we can do as citizens to help our small businesses. And part of that is make sure that we don't have a rebound of this virus, and make sure that we do everything safely and carefully. The state is going to be working and continuing to work really hard to make sure folks have clear guidance on what it means to reopen for retail and for restaurants, how to do that safely, and think about the folks in our community that need to be protected. If we can do that all responsibly and do this carefully and think about how we gather, we can help ourselves to ensure that we don't have to have a future closure and have to re-shut down some businesses. And it's something we think about a lot at the state, and we're concerned about, and we think a lot about what the data says about what may come in the fall and in the winter. So that's sort of on all of us, and we can help do that. And if we do a better job of it, we can make sure that we don't have to shut some folks down. So that's another thing we can do to help.
Thank you, Chris.
The other piece I might add to that is making sure that the businesses that have not been able to be open or have been in limited capacity, so like your restaurants, make sure that you use them by gift cards if you want to save that for the future, because that helps give them cash. I always recommend triple tipping. So things that you can do to help, because some of the businesses, the shops that have been essential, they've had some cash coming in. The others have to get their inventories going. And even if you look at some of the retail that's going to be coming up, some of the rules are saying that if I try something on, and no one else can try that same outfit on for a whole day, well, that's not going to work. So I mean, they can't make their business pencil. So using gift cards and some of those ways also help. And I think the very nice line is those small businesses are the ones that have been there for your sporting events, for your auctions. They've been there all the way helping businesses in the community for years. So it's now time that we kind of give back to them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Betsy. I would say, just even from a policy perspective, I know the question said, what as citizens can we be doing? But just my colleagues and I on the city council have been doing what to use sort of the sporting metaphor that the congressman's been using, have been playing small ball at the local level, while our federal folks have been playing these big games of sending out resources in the way of stimulus. And one place that we did exactly what you said for our local businesses was work with the state to allow restaurants to do craft beverages to go, which allowed them to free up resources that they had already spent on the shelves of their business and put them into play. They were both a customer demand and also provided some liquidity of a high markup product that they have. So that is an example of how we can do little things, but they have big ramifications for the businesses that have already invested those money. So I love the idea of the gift cards.
Yeah, I think I would chime in a little bit, and I agree with what everyone said here in terms of ways those who continue to, thankfully, I get to work from home and I can make an income, as can my wife, and we're extremely fortunate, but I know some people who can't. And I think one of the things that's really important, in addition to going out and making sure that we can still support businesses who can still provide a service, albeit in a fashion that's different than normal, is that we as leaders work together with decision makers to make sure that the rules and processes are fair and reasonable and equitable. And I think that's where, I hear a lot of frustrations, people scratching their heads because they can buy clothes at Walmart and Target, but they can't buy it at the small business owner's shop down the street. And they're told that, of course, we know that's because there's food sold at those stores and not at the others. But if that's your business, or if that's where you work, you look at that and you scratch your head and you say, look, this seems inconsistent. It seems inequitable to me. And I truly believe that everybody in this community wants to do what's right, wants to do what's right by for their own personal health, for their family members, for their community members. But as we kind of move forward into these phases, it's troubling, to me at least, to hear Tom Pearson say things that, in terms of what we don't know. We know we have enormous limitations on what we can do to control the spread of this virus, but we should know really clearly when things are able to get back to normal. And I think if we can provide that clarity, albeit we have to be nimble and we have to make adjustments. If we can provide that clarity to small business owners and their workers, if we can provide that predictability, and if it's fair and equitable across the spectrum, then I think the attitude that we're all in this together gets that much stronger, and the confidence that Councilmember Thoms spoke to of at the beginning of the session of getting us all on the same page moving forward gets that much stronger. But when people can't really discern why this and why not this, I think that's a challenge. And that might take us to one of our next questions. Chris Green, can you kind of chime in? You're the only person here from the state of Washington. Can you, obviously, applauding everybody working in state government, working overtime to try and get this right with all the uncertainty in terms of what the right thing is to do, and that being a moving target on a daily basis, and all of us concerned and wanting to do the right thing, but as Congressman Kilmer said, suffering tremendously financially, at least a number of businesses in our community are, and the people who work there. So can you just kind of walk us through how what you think the state government can do in the next 2 to 6 weeks that can really build some more confidence? We've got the phased approach. We've got a trickle of, in terms of the information on what we know is going to happen, what we don't know is going to happen. But how can we build more confidence for people with those concerns? Thank you.
Well, Councilmember McCarthy, you raised some good points. So myself and others in our team at the Department of Commerce have been working with businesses in retail, working directly with restaurants, working with car washes, working with manufacturers, any kind of business you can think of right now that's been impacted. We've been talking to them directly, working with the industry associations, the labor leadership groups that have interests in how these businesses can reopen safely as well. And it's very clear that this has been difficult. The pressure has been immense on folks that have had to, first of all, go through Executive Order 2025 and have had to reduce operations or close operations, to understand how to get clarity on what some of those requirements were and whether or not a company was an essential business. we were up, our teams were up throughout the night, most of the first few weeks of this executive order, answering, I think we had 10,000 emails with questions in the first day. So I think the notion that there's questions and concerns from folks is very real to us and apparent. And for someone like myself that works in economic development at the Department of Commerce, it's something that we're wanting to make sure we could try to remedy and get answers to folks for. Where we're at right now is we're on the path to reopening safely. And to your point about how we can restore confidence, I think this is the best path that we can be on right now. And right now, basically, we're in phase 1, which began May 5th. I won't go through all of the kinds of activities that are now allowed in phase 1, but on either the governor's website or on the coronavirus.wa.gov website, you'll be able to see all these phases. I think this is the first step of trying to build confidence that businesses can open again, can begin to create revenue. And the point I made earlier was, let's make sure that as they do this, we can do it safely. We can demonstrate that. We effectively give businesses the resources, the training, and the tools to make sure to do that safely, and begin to continue on this trajectory so we can get to phase 2 and have additional manufacturers and have restaurants open and have in-store retail open again. And then on to phase 3 and to phase 4. I think the point that I want to make is, let's not have an unnecessary pause in getting through these phases and slowly rolling these open. And that's the point I think the state's going to take on sort of a large role to try to make sure we can continue through that process, working with labor, working with businesses directly to make sure we can continue to create revenue again. So that's, I think right now, I'm happy and delighted that we're able to begin to open some of these business activities. And we have a little more work to do to make sure we continue to do it safely.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see if we can get, I know Congressman Kilmer has to depart here in the not too distant future. So I'm going to see if we have one that I think I know the answer from, at least from the local perspective on this, but it says, how many businesses in Tacoma are eligible for local, state, and federal funding? And I guess to add on to that, what are we doing to ensure the economic stimulus and rebuilding funds are encouraged to be distributed equitably across, in your case, Congressman, I guess your entire congressional district, for the case of this call, across the city and or county? Did you hear that question?
I did, yeah. Thanks for the question. And I give a lot of credit to Bruce Kendall from the Economic Development Board and Tom Pearson from the Chamber and the team at the Minority Business Development Agency and Sound Outreach and Centro Latino and the Asia Pacific Cultural Center and others that are actively evangelizing some of the resources that are available. I say that because obviously these resources are only helpful if you know about them. But if you are a small business with 500 or fewer employees, you are eligible for the relief that I mentioned in my opening remarks. You're eligible for the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans. You're eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. There may be some exceptions, but by and large, you'd be eligible. I mentioned that the House in the bill that was passed a few weeks back tried to focus additional resources so that smallest businesses, some of the underserved businesses, would have access to those resources. And so there were set-asides for community-based lenders. And that's in part why you're seeing some additional set-asides put forward in the HEROES Act that we'll be voting on tomorrow. I mentioned, I've also introduced called the Paycheck Protection Program Extension Act to really put that effort on steroids. And I've also introduced a bill that has not yet become law called the Restore America's Main Streets Act, which would provide grant-based aid to employers of 50 employees or fewer. We've got more to do. We need to make sure that employers and their workers in our region have the help that they need to weather this difficult time.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
You bet.
I'm gonna take our next question on here for the director of the Economic Development Board, Bruce Kendall. Bruce, maybe you can give us your thoughts on what will the post-COVID environment for economic development look like, and how will we incentivize folks to invest? And maybe you just talk about, there's going to need to be a lot of capital, right, to get us going again. We've heard some of the federal programs, but what are some other resources that can really get the economy going?
Well, thank you, Councilmember, for the question, and it's great to be joining all our good colleagues on this call. Yeah, right now, cash is king, capital is king, because we're in the response phase to COVID from all perspectives, including a business perspective. And that's why the federal programs, the city's loan program, the county's loan program, states' multiple programs are so important. It's survival mode, and so cash we're looking at now is cash devoted to pure survival. Your question's a great one, because it's about what about after that, because there's still going to need to be lots of capital available to businesses of all size so they can fund inventory, they can fund perhaps even paying their rent for a while. These may be grants, they may be loans, and I anticipate the thinking in the economic development world is for the next year to 2 years, the access to capital is going to be key. So where's that going to come from? It'll come from traditional sources like banks, because banks aren't going away. They're now being used mostly as a funnel for federal dollars going to companies, but they're going to be back in the lending business in an aggressive way for companies that need it going forward. And so, and our banks, unlike after the financial crisis of 10 years ago, our banks are strong. Our banks are not in failure mode the way they were then. They're very, very strong. Our credit unions are strong as well. So we anticipate that they'll be in a good position with strong balance sheets to be helpful to businesses after we get through this initial crisis response phase. And then there's a lot that is on the backs of, or not on the backs of, but are in front of businesses they need to embrace more so than ever. And this is already happening, but it's now, they're learning to do this in a deep, deep way, faster than they had been. And that is the embracing of technology in all of its forms. This meeting is an example of that. E-government, e-commerce, e-entertainment is going to be part of our lives in a deeper way going forward. And for businesses, whether it's a mom and pop or somebody with 100 or 500 or 1,000 employees, they're going to be leaning more and more on digital resources to be successful. So communities that embrace deep investment, in broadband and digital access for not just businesses, but for their customers. So that's all customers everywhere. Those will be communities that will be ahead of the game going forward. So yeah, capital is key, but on the side of private and public infrastructure, that'll make a big difference in businesses' long-term survival. Among the many things they'll need is our deeper investments, collective investments in technology. I could go on, but I'll leave it at that at this point.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a great answer. I think you're spot on as it relates to where the banks are, and I think that bodes well based on where our economy was pre-COVID, in my opinion. And I really appreciate your longitudinal understanding of the macro economy as well as the local economy, because I think that's spot on. The banks now have access to this capital from the government, but they will be in the lending mode, and so it'll be really important to harness the entrepreneurial spirit of our folks in the economy now, and there'll be money there to support them. And I appreciate your answer on that. I think this question might be something that Tom Pearson from the Chamber, if he's available, will be able to answer. And Bruce, you could as well, I suspect, because you folks are leading these calls. But it says, how is the Chamber and the city helping people feel safe to start going out to shop as we reopen? But I would just say the shop part of it is just how are we as a community embracing the reopening of our businesses?
Yeah, I think part of that answer there is, and Betty covered it a little bit in terms of the PPE, is getting our businesses ready to open. And that means, you or I, councilman, we don't want to go to a restaurant or a retail location that isn't ready for us in this new COVID world that we're in. And so making sure our businesses are prepared and have done the spacing, done the things that we as a community, want to be comfortable going into. And I think that's part of it as well. And then to kind of go back to the question for Bruce that you had there, it's also to think about Tacoma, Pierce County, the Pierce County Way. We have an opportunity here in this new world to really look at, it's a quality of life that we have down here. And I think people are going to be less likely to go to Seattle, be in Seattle. They'd rather be here in Tacoma. And I think we need to we have a huge opportunity for not as us as a community, but us as a business community as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think Bruce's point about change is extremely important. And I think what we're learning, as you so rightfully say, is how to put the right knowledge into our business owners of what it's going to take to reopen, and what that'll look like. And really, I think as regulators, what I struggle with and really keeps me up at night is being able to have enough hours in the day to figure out what that change in physicality looks like from a regulatory perspective. Because if we think it's going to fit within the box of the rules that we have now, I think we're going to be lagging behind. But the sooner we can get ahead of what the change looks like, the technology change, the physicality change, I think that's extremely important to really open up with what I think will be social distancing for some time to come. Conor, I think you have the next question.
Thanks, Robert. Cycling through here. Wanted to ask about principles of equity in terms of the investments and how the funds are the federal and state funds are being handed out. Is someone here on the panel able to address? Maybe you, Jeff, can take a kick at this. The congressman spoke briefly about the PPP money. I think the federal government handed out something like $350 billion in 2 weeks, which I think was an amazing feat for government. But as we've since learned, perhaps the process for deciding who was really in need the most wasn't the most appropriate, and perhaps those equitable principles for particularly our MWBE community weren't considered. So Jeff, and then I see Congressman Kilmer showed up. Maybe the both of you can talk about how we integrate making sure that the limited resources we're able to funnel, that principles of equity are taken into account.
Congressman, go ahead. Take the first shot at that.
Well, so I spoke to this a little bit previously in saying I think the first round of Paycheck Protection Program funds did a poor job of making sure dollars went sufficiently to folks who most needed it. Having said that, of the 1.6 million loans that went out in that first round, more than 1 million of them went to employers, I think 10 employees or fewer. Those numbers are pretty good. And at the same time, you had some instances where Paycheck Protection Program loans went out to large publicly financed companies. That's not who these dollars were for. Having been born and raised here in the state of Washington, I have always hated the Los Angeles Lakers. I hate them more when I've heard that they took some of the Paycheck Protection Program funds, because those funds were not intended to pay LeBron James's salary. They were intended to support Main Street employers in the city of Destiny. And thankfully, the Treasury Department has gotten some of those companies to pay that money back. But most importantly, I think you've seen the SBA and you've seen Congress, through direction given to the SBA, change some of the parameters of the program to make sure that there are equity considerations, so that there's a focus on community-based lenders that have those relationships within their own community, whether they be urban or rural, making sure that there are set-asides for local banks, local credit unions, small and medium-sized. And then part of that is on all of us. I mean, I have joined the mayor on Zoom with Sound Outreach and the MBDA. I've joined, a countless number of organizations, all focused on trying to make sure that every community, and part of the strength of the city of Tacoma is its diversity, and that means we have that it's all the more important to make that effort to ensure that the diverse community knows about all of these resources and is able to access these resources.
We learned quite a bit through our first round of funding of our stabilization loan fund, and it was difficult to reach out to the communities directly because we couldn't go out and knock on doors. So we tried to work through our community partners to get the word out, and I think that we did a pretty good job of dispersing the funds across the city, and demographically, perhaps not as good a job. What we did learn is that there were some reasons and some technical assistance that we can provide moving forward to some of the communities of color that had more difficulty accessing the funds in the first round. As we move forward and start utilizing block grant funds, we're looking at providing grants potentially rather than loans, or a combination thereof. And because of its block grant funding, we need to make sure that we're targeting those funds equitably, for sure, and to the communities that are most in need. And I think that will help us to get the dollars out in a more equitable fashion. Something that we've had our eye on, we've been thinking a lot about, and staff is really trying to come up with a way to make it both fair and equitable, and at the same time making sure that the scarce resources that we have are being used wisely.
And this is Chris Green again from the State Department of Commerce. Let me just add just a couple things from the state's perspective. I think what we have done, especially in my department, the Office of Economic Development and Competitiveness, is think about how can we, even before the COVID crisis, how can we build or work to establish trust with communities? And what's the best way to do that? And then how do we help make sure there are services and assistance and resources that can get to those communities the right way? I think one thing, just overall, in the last recession and in recessions prior, there's a couple things that are unequivocally true. The recovery is disproportionate and it's not equitable. That happens both regionally, when we have parts of the state that have very high unemployment several years after the recovery, and it very much happens with disadvantaged business ownership categories. And in particular for minority business owned categories. So what the Department of Commerce has done most recently are a few things. One is we established a program where we have specifically contracted vendors. These are contracted partners the department has around the state. We have 11 of those groups. These are organizations that help disadvantaged businesses specifically with technical assistance and how to access resources. One of those that has a contract with us to do that, will carry out that work in partnership with us, is the Tacoma Urban League, and there are several others around the state. The second thing is when we put programs together now, like the small business grant program that we recently rolled out, where businesses could be eligible for up to $10,000, we ensured that as part of the criteria for thinking about what businesses were eligible, we worked with those contracting organizations to help make sure businesses could get their application put together right. We made sure they had extra time to make sure they had translation services, to make sure they had a fair shot at getting those applications in. And as we reviewed those, we ensured that we took into consideration the fact that some businesses have not had an equal shot institutionally at some of these grant funds in the past. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about doing. And as we think about recovery over the next 4 years, possibly, very much equity and diversity are top of our mind, and how we get that recovery done and how we don't repeat some of those mistakes. For the rest of the state, very much it's a regional discussion as much as it is a demographic discussion. So that's kind of where this is
Hey, Robert, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Question, as society adjusts to a COVID-19 world, is there any help for small businesses seeking to modernize its processes and invest in technology? And I think, if the congressman may be gone, but I think for those of us from the policy perspective, I think as we look towards what these final bits of stimulus look like and or changes, I certainly, and the mayor can speak to this as well. I think, just as we stood up our small business loan program, there's grants that the county's doing, and they're doing loan programs. I absolutely believe, and I know the mayor and I have spoken about this specifically, a need to support our local businesses as they do seek to make that change and modernize their processes and invest in technology. So I know that's something that the mayor and I and my colleagues have been thinking about, at least at our policy level, but that's something we would probably have to do. And I would argue, based even on what Tom was saying, Pearson from the Chamber of Commerce, it isn't only that we need to be ready for the change, but we can get ahead of the change. I think if you think about the way we do it here, the way the Tacoma way, the Pierce County way, how we work together, I think we were innovators in the economy prior to this slowdown. And many of those innovations really were born since the last recession in the late 2000s. So I think we were right in a great place to continue to take our strengths and working with our business community and the entrepreneurs that we have here in Tacoma that came here because of the quality of life and the opportunity here. And I fully expect, if not at a local program, certainly I will be advocating for any of the monies that come to us through this potential stimulus for local governments, be looking to do exactly that, provide resources to allow for the modernization of our local businesses as they try to deal with this post-COVID environment of how they do social distancing, how they do their services, how they promote and the like. Mayor, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Councilmember Thoms, I also would like to add, of the $30 million the county has added to economic stabilization, so that's the big pot of which some of it's been allocated. There are pieces that we're looking at and evaluating how we do it underneath the CARES Act of reimbursable kinds of grants for COVID compliance, which could maybe include technology pieces. We're also looking at innovation grants and how those go either across for a company or maybe things across industries. So some of that creative stuff is what's going to get us to the next level, and we're trying to figure out programs that will work and everyone can take advantage of those. And I also wanted to note, which I thought you would find interesting, on our loans, of all the loans we've had, we've only told no to 9 people.
That's great.
So we have really worked that those that were even on the margins, that we've worked to make sure that they can get a business loan. So I feel like that's something our whole Pierce County and City of Tacoma do, is we try to help each other in that process.
No, I think I can speak for myself, and I believe I can speak for my colleagues in this. We've been very pleased and proud of the effort of you and Jeff working together to ensure that our region is safe, and that you're trying to support each other's programs to make sure that we're covering the widest group of applicants. So I think that's great. And you're sort of helping us in what may come, through future stimulus efforts with the tranche of money that you all just received at Pierce County level. So I know you and the executive have been working closely with Jeff and the mayor to work through that. So I think that's great. And I hope we are able to share that with our businesses. I know the calls that we do 3 times a week are getting to hundreds of people, but that bears greater acknowledgement through the community that we have these access to resources to allow them to do some of these COVID compliance.
And we're also working with all of our other cities, because a lot of the cities did receive some funding from the state under the COVID. So and trying to figure out with those cities then, how do they take their resources and not duplicate, but augment, so we make sure that we really have that leverage and I guess investment power throughout the greater Pierce County area.
Well, thank you very much.
Councilmember, I would add that there's a gigantic infrastructure bill, more than likely, that's going to come out of DC before the end of the year, that will include a huge technology element. And that is going to be one of the big takeaways from this crisis, is the understanding nationally that we need to invest in technology from an equity perspective. Everybody needs it, and a lot of people don't have it. And I love what you said about what can we do locally to help enhance that. Well, we have some companies locally, like Cumula, for example, that helps small businesses that aren't technologically there yet and sophisticated enough yet get there. They're a homegrown Tacoma company on Pacific Avenue. They could be a part of that solution going forward. So there's the big stuff coming from the feds, and then there's some things we can do locally with some of our entrepreneurs. So you can start to get excited about some of the big changes that can come down the road. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate you chiming in. I mean, I can't stress enough for the businesses that I've been speaking to how important these calls have been that we're doing each week. So I want to say thank you to all our panelists. We had a great group of panelists for the economic development discussion. We're getting close to the witching hour here, and I'll just make my remarks very brief. I'm looking to create economic resiliency through the additional resources that are coming through, be it state, federal, local, to provide the bridge forward. And I think we can borrow from others who have said this. I want us to be better than we were before. And I think if we incorporate some of these technologies, some of these practices, and we as government can look towards an eye of being flexible to the regulatory piece of it, because I think that was something that, there's monies, and then there's ways that you can change the processes by which people can create economic opportunity. So I'm keen to work closely on that because I think the sooner we get ahead of the curve on that, the better we'll be. And I'll let my colleagues on the council close as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Thoms. Yeah, and I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank Congressman Kilmer for really doing yeoman's work for our community. We just tremendous asset, particularly in terms of getting resources to all sorts of resources, including the small businesses in Tacoma, Pierce County. I want to thank Tom Pearson from the Chamber of Commerce for being here, Bruce Kendall from the Economic Development Board, Chris Green from the Department of Commerce, and Betty Capistani from Pierce County Economic Development, as well as our own Jeff Robinson from the City of Tacoma. I know you're all working hard. I know you're extremely passionate. I know you are one step closer than many others to the severe economic challenges being faced by businesses and workers in our community. And so I know that you do this work with passion and with a sense of purpose to help the people we all serve. And I truly appreciate working with you. I would say, just in my final comments, moving forward, as you heard tonight, we have limited resources, we have limited jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean we can't, in local government, make a large impact. And I believe we are, to the extent we can. And I do think we need to continue to advocate as strong as possible for the businesses and the workers in our community who want to be safe, but who need to go back to work to provide for their families. So, and it's a delicate balance. And as I said earlier, there's more unknowns than knowns, but we all have to, trust each other, work with each other, and just work through the nuances of that as quick as possible so that we can reduce and mitigate the amount of economic damage that families are facing and our businesses are facing in our community, while making sure that we are preventing the spread of this disease to the greatest extent possible. So with that, I'll kick it over to our beloved mayor. Thank you, Mayor Woodards.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy. Let me first thank Councilmember Thoms and Councilmember McCarthy for hosting tonight's conversation. I learned a lot, as much as you think you know, and it's great to have so many experts on the call or on the Zoom with us tonight. So I ditto everything that they said. I won't repeat it. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Daniela, who has been translating in Spanish for us during this whole meeting in real time. So Daniela, thank you for joining us again this week. I want to remind everybody that these are tough times. I probably don't need to remind anybody. We all know these are tough times, but we will get through it, and we will get through it together. Next week, same time, same bat time, same bat channel, 6 o'clock next Thursday, we will be hosting our fourth T-Town Hall. And next week's conversation will be around education. And at-large Councilmember Lillian Hunter and Councilmember John Heinz will be leading that discussion. They're going to have a great set of panelists to talk about families and adults and education in Tacoma and what's happening during this time. Remind every one of you to please stay socially distanced, take care of yourselves, be safe. Be safe, and we will get through it. We'll get through it together because we are compassionate Tacoma. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you for all the staff work and making this happen. Have a great night.